Well, they never like to make it too easy for you. The Pittsburgh Steelers did get the victory. They did pick up the Monday Night Football victory and continue their incredible streak as a franchise with yet another home Monday Night Football win. They haven't lost at home on Monday Night Football since 1991, as amazing as that sounds. This one, though, not the most impressive, certainly at the end. The Steelers do win it 29-27 over the Chicago Bears. Pittsburgh now 5-3 on the year. And after what's happened around the NFL this week, they do have a bit of the driver's seat in front of them. However, it almost wasn't that way. It almost was disaster. They almost missed the opportunity. So we're going to discuss all of that here on this Steelers edition of Pittsburgh Postgame on Pittsburgh Sports Live. And of course, Steelers Now. I'm your host, as always, Mike Asti, and I am joined for this conversation by Shawn Curtis, who I definitely appreciate him staying up with me here for this broadcast. Shawn Curtis, a sports writer with the Tribune Democrat in Johnstown. Shawn, thanks for staying up, as I thought we were going to be able to be done with this by now, and I would have been done with post-game press conferences maybe around 11:30. We'd be done with this at midnight. We were in the fourth quarter at 10:30, and then nope, all chaos broke loose in the fourth quarter, as you would imagine. But I'm happy to talk to you nonetheless.
The Steelers were due for an absolute circus in the fourth quarter.
Yeah.
And the Bears are always up for it. So, it was the perfect storm there.
In a way, you certainly could say that. In Justin Fields, despite a losing effort, I did some of the away press conferences as well. That was a game-winning style drive at the end. I mean, for a rookie, that was a great thing to happen for him. Obviously, penalties went against the Bears, heavily against the Bears. The taunting call that we'll get to as well. A lot for the Bears that leaves them to believe that maybe there could be some excuses for this game, but very much down in the dumps. Whereas the Steelers are pretty excited, as you would imagine. And this is after a Steelers team that they picked up a win not too long ago and were pretty upset off of what happened at the end of that game. So at the end of the day, the Steelers got out of this with a victory. That's the most important thing. What are your initial takeaways from this game? The Steelers do get the win. Early on, it looked like they were going to potentially boat race Chicago, who's dealing with a rookie quarterback, a young team, a banged up team. This certainly was primed to be a Steelers victory. And when they jump out to a 2-touchdown lead, you think they're going to continue to soar on to a W. But of course, things unraveled, a special team score, some mistakes by the Steelers. A lot of things weren't as effective in the second half, and they almost lost this game, trailing in that final minute.
Well, you're going to look at it and say, okay, well, the Bears opened up the offense in the second half, but really it wasn't so much that the Bears opened it up as much as the passes were connecting. Justin Fields had a couple deep balls that were just fingertips away from being just spectacular catches. Yeah. And NFL Next Gen put out his numbers. He was 9 of 16 of balls that traveled more than 10 air yards for 225 yards and a touchdown. And that's just something you're not seeing in Pittsburgh right now.
That's true. And yet it took them a while, I believe around 90 some yards in the first half. So it did take them a while to get their offense moving. But once they did, and again, you go to that last minute or so touchdown drive, that was big boy stuff. That was Tom Brady stuff for Justin Fields to connect there at the end. It didn't end up mattering for the Bears. They end up still losing this game, but it took Boswell having to recover a fumble, then kicking the game-winning field goal. So penalties are going against Chicago, a taunting call. That's how the Steelers did get out of this one. Steelers do win it 29-27. Shawn Curtis here, writer with the Tribune Democrat, joining me here on the Steelers postgame show. Want to find any of our postgame covered, including our game recap, go over to SteelersNow.com, and you'll find all the postgame video reaction here from coaches and players here on Pittsburgh Sports Live. Now, Shawn, what do you think did change from that first to second half? Was it just the Bears finally connected, and that was kind of as simple as it could be offensively for them? They did pick it up, but they also neutralized TJ Watt a little bit. He got a couple sacks in that first half, not as effective in the second half. The pass rush wasn't as effective. What changed? Was it what the Bears were doing, or did the Steelers just simply play worse and they were not as effective themselves?
I think when it was TJ Watt and Alex Highsmith not getting home on Justin Fields, that gave the Bears carte blanche to really do what the Bears do. And you saw when TJ Watt was able to be semi-disruptive, that Fields had happy feet, but he had a lot of time to make these throws, and he made throws. You said it was a big boy drive in that fourth quarter that gave the Bears a lead, and the Bears did everything they could to put him in a position to succeed. He succeeded. They just couldn't hold on.
It does almost it does almost give one of those feels of you almost feel bad for Justin Fields and the Bears a little bit here. Undermanned, he's a rookie. He did have a big boy drive at the end of the game, and it ended up still not being good enough. The Steelers, though, yeah, they had that pass rush going. They usually feast on rookie quarterbacks, TJ Watt, Cam Hayward, etc., and then not as much in that second half. What are your thoughts on the penalty disparity? Because that was brought up a lot in terms of the post-game press conferences. You don't want to ever go to penalties if you're, in any of these games. I'm not saying the Bears are going to blame it on that, but it was heavily weighted in favor of the Bears with penalties, including that taunting penalty that seemed like even fans of the Steelers and Bears both, don't love just in general. Did the referees have a role in this game? Did they play a factor in this game for you?
I think it was a little bit of a ref show, but also you look at the penalties that Chicago had. Very few of them were execution penalties. A lot of pre-snap, a lot of post-snap, a lot of discipline. And maybe that's a sign of a frustrated team. Maybe that's a sign of a team trying to do too much. If this is baseball, you'd be saying, maybe they're holding on to the bat a little too tight. You had key moments like Robert Quinn lining up in the neutral zone on what could have been a stop. And
right,
it just seemed to be raining on the Bears. And I think, again, a lot of it was stuff that wasn't happening during the play. And I think that's the difference right now between the Pittsburgh Steelers being 5-3 and the Chicago Bears dreaming of being 5-3 right now.
Yeah, it also feels like the Steelers got lucky in the opponent in this game. They faced a Bears team that's undermanned with a rookie quarterback, and yeah, they eventually got it going, whether that's the Steelers floundering or the Bears turning it on or figuring things out or whatever the case may be. This Bears team's not headed for the playoffs. This isn't one of the best teams in the NFL. If the Steelers were playing one of those elite teams, you figure this game totally could have unraveled and they potentially would have lost this game. Now, going to what the Steelers actually did in this game, though, they do win the game, so we can't, have too much of a funeral here. The Steelers do get the victory 29-27, and that is the big thing in the NFL, getting the win. A lot of the Steelers rivals, a lot of favorite teams this week, including Sunday when the Steelers were off, they could watch those games. They lost some games they felt like they should have won. Talk to the Buffalo Bills. They had a close one. They couldn't get anything going, and they did lose. So Steelers get the win. That is a big deal. They are now 5-3. Certainly have some hopes in front of them. Not many teams with a better record, as crazy as that sounds, around the AFC or even in the NFL. But how do you think the Steelers played overall, especially offensively? Ben Roethlisberger, 21 out of 30, a 70% completion percentage, 205, 2 TDs, no picks, so he didn't make any incredible mistake. There, 111 quarterback rating. Najee Harris, only 2.8 yards per carry. He got into the end zone early, was utilized early, not as much later, then couldn't get things going. Deontay Johnson with a couple big catches, but only 11 overall yards. Chase Claypool, 2 for 13. This is them on the ground. Deontay Johnson, 5 for 56. I knew he had some more yards. 5 for 56. And of course, Freiermuth had a big day as a tight end with 40 plus yards and a couple into the end zone. Claypool still not much there. Couldn't really give you the yak yards you've been wanting from Claypool for a while. This is several games in a row where he hasn't really put up big numbers. How would you evaluate the Steelers offensively? How would you evaluate Ben? And is this now an epidemic? The Steelers have depth at receiver. They've had some injuries as well, but this is a game unlike what we've seen in recent weeks where the running game didn't really click and the receivers didn't really provide the big plays. And yeah, they put up 29 points on a lowly Bears team. But again, this feels like if you're facing anybody else, maybe a tougher defense, this would have been a worse day because these numbers just aren't great overall.
It is frightening to think about if they were playing against a defense that was fully manned in Chicago. I mean, if Khalil Mack plays tonight, we're looking at a completely different result, probably maybe Bears 27, Steelers 19, or something to that effect.
Yeah, he's a game wrecker. Khalil Mack is absolutely a game wrecker, much like TJ Watt. But yeah, Khalil Mack didn't play for the Bears.
But it looked like after that first drive where everything just moved so smoothly for Pittsburgh was content to just stab the Bears with a butter knife for 3 hours.
Yeah.
Like they ran for 105 yards, and I'm just wondering, how did they run for 105 yards? Because Najee Harris had 62 yards. You had a couple.
Yeah, collectively, James Washington 13, Chase 13, Deontay 11, as I read earlier. Benny Snell even had 6. So yeah, it was together to get the yards.
I mean, you even had Ben Roethlisberger on a designed run. Just, I mean, it was like almost like watching my PlayStation glitch because he looked like he was running at about 15 frames per second out there. It was, it's fun. It's a little throwback, but like he didn't get the first down, and I'm thinking, like maybe it was for the best he didn't get the first down there because I honestly think in that situation the Steelers may have tried to snap the ball once or twice more, and that's just asking for disaster. But receivers, it's weird because you look at the 2 longest completions that Roethlisberger had, and both times the receiver had to come back to the football.
Right.
And you're just not used to seeing that with Ben Roethlisberger.
I guess I'll ask you this, and this is a simple question here, because obviously Ben started off the season really struggling. They did get the win in Buffalo, but then he really struggled, and that certainly helped them lose some games. He then played good enough. That's been the word people have been saying around Pittsburgh. That's what my colleagues have been saying. Ben has been good enough for the Steelers to win. He was good enough when they were 11-0 last year, and then no longer was good enough. Ben's numbers here in this game, they're not necessarily bad. They're not gaudy. It's kind of game manager stuff, even though they almost lost this game. Would you say Ben is still playing good enough for this team to get where they want to be?
I would give Ben maybe about a C- up to a C. I think what he did was what the Steelers needed him to do. He took care of the football. There weren't as many scary throws as there have been earlier this season, which I think is an improvement. And
yeah.
And so,
no picks,
I mean,
taking care of the football. The mistakes aren't from Ben. Yeah.
I mean, you're no longer going to have the YOLO throws that Ben Roethlisberger was known for, years ago. But I think he's learning to play within what his arm and what his abilities can give him.
And that's what he did when they were at 11-0 last year. And then, of course, didn't do it toward the end of the season. And you go to the four turnover game with the interceptions against the Browns there in the playoffs and just kind of all unraveled. We saw a little bit of that Ben earlier in this season. But when you get this Ben, I think the recipe for Ben clearly is under 35 pass attempts, 200 to 215, 25 passing yards, a couple touchdowns, no picks, and then however many completions it takes to get there. That's kind of the recipe for Ben's stat line if you're going to be winning these games. Again, 21 for 30, 205, 2 TDs, no interceptions. He was sacked 4 times, though. Does the offensive line still concern you? Or, wow, Najee's had such a great rookie year and has really turned it on, this wasn't the best Najee day. So Najee missed some holes earlier in the season when he was having that slow start. Is Najee still finding his footing even though he's becoming an elite back? Or are you still having concern about the offensive line that could hold back this team? Because it does feel like with the question marks around Zach Banner, who still can't get on the field, Chuck Secor, who still doesn't seem to be good enough. Neither is Dan Moore Jr. Another real kind of weak day for the offensive line here in this game.
I mean, the Bears probably from about midway through the second quarter on just started winning. I won't say every down, but almost every down. They were creating enough chaos. And again, thank goodness Khalil Mack was not playing tonight because it could have gotten ugly. I mean, I don't want to think about it.
Yeah, again, Khalil Mack did not play in this game. That absolutely is a factor. He was inactive in this game. He is a game wrecker. He is an all-pro. He certainly is the TJ Watt of their side, if not more. In the past, he's been more than that. So he is certainly an impact player that could have been a difference maker in this game, to say the very least. Here, talking with Shawn Curtis of the Tribune Democrat here on the Steelers postgame show. Steelers do win this Monday Night Football affair 29-27. As now we're talking to you Tuesday morning after this game, as it did kind of linger on with the felt like an hour-long final 2 minutes of the game, in which at one point the Steelers were trailing after what could have been a game winner and was a game-leading touchdown drive from Justin Fields, the rookie. Boswell then hit the game-winning kick. In the mix there, recovered a fumble. Boswell's making a case for team MVP right now, which is just hysterical. And you saw his value when he wasn't on the field last game against Cleveland. That almost was a loss as well. Compounding everything, though, when you're going to that Cleveland game where they weren't exactly impressive, Boswell not being there, having to go for two. That certainly ultimately could have been a problem and could have lost them that game. They did win anyway. They did win this game. They are winning close games. They're winning games they have to win. They're winning big games for themselves. They're not really looking great in these wins, but unlike other teams around the NFL, they are winning. So as this season progresses now, how have your feelings about the Steelers changed? They started off on the road with the big win at Buffalo. They looked bad for several weeks. Now they're looking better. They're getting wins. They're not looking great, but they're getting wins. This Steelers team right now, based on the NFL, is a playoff team. And weeks ago, that certainly didn't appear to be the case. But again, when you analyze the game, it doesn't look good. Do you feel more confident about the Steelers now than say you would have been a few weeks ago? Or do you think maybe some of these wins are fool's gold because we were fooled last year with them stacking wins and maybe not really being that great?
I mean, I have no delusions of this being a Super Bowl team as it sits right now on November 9th, as we're talking on Tuesday morning. But I look back to Mike Tomlin's job in 2019, what he and the coaching staff were able to do without Ben Roethlisberger for 14 games on the cusp of a playoff spot. They couldn't quite get there. Yeah. But, with Mason Rudolph, Devlin Hodges, they almost got there. And this might actually be Mike Tomlin's best work as a head coach, with the coaching staff, because if you would have looked at their 3-game losing streak, that loss to the Raiders, that loss to the Bengals especially.
Yeah.
And I mean, the loss of Green Bay, all right, I think I had that as a loss on the schedule when it came out in the spring. But those other 2 losses, oh gosh, here comes Mike Tomlin's first losing season, and it's still possible. There are still plenty of football to be played.
Yeah, and even if that doesn't happen, but at that point, people thought maybe the Raiders were, so those losses could be excused. People thought, okay, the Raiders might be a playoff team. The Bengals might be a playoff team. And now the Raiders just have completely been chaos and drama on and off the field ever since that day, really. And then the Bengals, they lost a couple games in a row. They don't look nearly as good as they were at that point, even if they do still crawl in the playoffs. So those losses look even worse now in retrospect.
They do. But also, it's a case of those 2 losses gave teams a blueprint to beat the Steelers.
Right.
But Pittsburgh has taken the eraser and moved some stuff around. So that blueprint is completely different now. They're finding ways to not let themselves get beat the way teams expect to beat them.
True. And this defense, again, made some plays when they had to, even though points were eventually allowed. I think the concern, if you're a Steeler fan, the concern for the Steelers, which they do need to correct, it does appear they get worse as games progress. Maybe other teams figure things out. But of course, other coaches are getting paid. They're scheming. They're doing halftime adjustments. That's what you're supposed to do. And that has led to teams playing better in that second half. Certainly in this game, that's certainly the case with the Bears in this game. But some bright spots. Minka Fitzpatrick with a big play. Hadn't seen one of those in a while with him being so schemed against. Maybe still waiting one from Devin Bush, but there are impact players in this defense that are still making plays, causing fits for the opposing quarterback. And it's still about pass rush and turnovers for the defense. The offense doing just enough. I would say concern, they're not getting enough out of these receivers, not enough from the ground. And the offensive line continues to be weak. And yeah, they got overall production from the ground, but needing 2.8 yards from your top running back just cannot happen in a big game like this, even though Najee's been good this year. And that, again, maybe is the offensive line. What I do want to talk about now, though, is segueing this, because the Steelers, I'm sure Mike Tomlin's going to tell his team this. He's told us in the press conferences, any given Sunday, Thursday, or Monday, you can lose a game in the National Football League. It's tough to get these W's. They're getting paid too. The Steelers did win this game. They hung on. They won this game. It's not impressive at the end. You almost could have an atmosphere of feeling like the Bears maybe kind of can be happy with themselves despite losing, almost a moral victory for them, even though they don't exist. Whereas the Steelers, it kind of looked bad at the end and maybe almost blew this, but do get the victory. Same thing against the Browns. They did get the victory. There's a Steeler team now that is 5-3 after what's happened in the NFL. That's certainly a record that could be much worse. So going into the game against the Lions, that's another team like this, if not even more so, you should pluck off. You should get a W against. You should not have any problems against. You should be able to impress against. A little shorter of a turnaround. What do you expect from that game against the Lions, and what are your keys to that game against the Lions, the Steelers do have a lot to improve upon, but maybe that's the perfect storm to help them improve, because that's a Lions team that, of course, is floundering and one of the worst in football.
And the thing is, with Detroit right now, being one of the worst teams in football, like, they are playing in some games that are just absolutely 60-minute sweat sessions.
Yeah.
They are making teams work for those wins.
They are. They haven't won, but they have been in some close games, not as much recently, but you're correct. Yeah, 19-17 was a loss to the Vikings. They've been in close games.
Yeah. I mean, it took a NFL record field goal from Justin Tucker for the Ravens to beat them.
Right.
I think with Pittsburgh, it's one of those things. If there is a business card associated with Mike Tomlin, it is sometimes that they can start out strong, but they don't finish teams off. And I think this is the opportunity to start out strong and just maybe not like step on a team's neck and just end things in the second quarter, but to be able to exchange blows to maintain that like 2, 3, however many touchdown advantage you can build early by being supposedly a superior team. But the thing is, I am not convinced that the Steelers are going to have the superior offense. Well, they have the superior pieces on offense, but I don't know if overall.
Yeah, you would think all that talent should be able again to beat the Lions, but you just don't know. This also a Lions team that has 2 weeks to prepare for this game and coming off a bye. The Steelers obviously in a dogfight here on Monday Night Football that they didn't think would be a dogfight. They have the recipe of what they need to do to win games, but it almost wasn't enough. And again, you need more production from your wide receivers, even with Juju being out, even with other injuries. They have depth there. You have depth for a reason. They need more from those receivers. They need more production from the offensive line. But again, and not to be negative here, I don't think it's going to happen. I think this is basically the best of the O-line. I just don't think it's going to happen. So eventually that's going to be the Achilles heel. That's going to hurt Ben. That's going to hurt Najee. Going to hurt the overall team. The offensive line, I don't think it's going to get that much better. Certainly not this year.
And with the receiver production, you can look at something and say, oh, well, maybe they should put the ball a little further down the field, get them into more space. But there's not time to get the receivers into space a lot of the time.
Again,
I mean, Ben has one of the quickest releases in the NFL, and it's almost out of necessity at this point. He is not getting time to throw the football.
No, again, the offensive line has had their moments where they've been okay at times. And I think everyone knew, reasonably speaking, this was going to be a young and experienced offensive line that was not going to be a strength of this team. The offensive line, though, is an underrated facet of any NFL team, any football team in general at any level, even Pee Wee football. You got to have protection. You got to have the offensive line play well, or no one's going to be able to do anything. And if the offensive line is playing poorly, it's going to hamper everything else, no matter who you are. It's going to make it tougher, and that still seems to be the case for the Steelers. That's the case in this game. Just as we kind of round things out here, just some news and notes, and based on some inactives in this game. Number one, with Freiermuth's emergence, do the Steelers even need to get Ebron back? Obviously, he'll eventually play when he gets healthy. He missed back-to-back games. Gentry was able to catch some passes against the Browns and in prior games this year. I think that's kind of a surprise for people that he can be a pass catcher. If he becomes that pass catcher, Ebron's not needed beyond this year. But do they need him back? And then is there time? Is there room? Will it ever occur that Zach Banner gets back on the field? Because maybe he's re-aggravated something, but it's a very long time from the serious injury from week 1 of a year ago after he won the job over Chuck Secor in camp. No one's really definitive on what's going on, but it appears like he must not be showing enough in practice. Maybe he has re-aggravated something. There's not a serious injury that we're aware of, or at least is being reported. There's some rumors even with colleagues of mine that he's needed surgery off a re-aggravation and turned it down, and he's still not ready because of it. Who knows? But are we going to see him, and how much longer can this linger before it's just, why is Banner here? As much as I do like the guy.
My fear was, as this was starting to unfurl a couple of weeks back, is it conditioning? And then
he's a bigger man.
Yes. And I'm seeing like some more of, what you were leading on to, where, maybe there was another procedure that he's holding out on to try to get back out on the field, but maybe like he just can't hold up right now.
Maybe.
And, it's with Banner. I mean, he's a guy who's going to improve the line when he gets on the field, but how much, what is needed to get him onto the field?
And also, you would think
what
he's going to
unlocks
improve
it?
the line. I mean, to be fair, it's an unknown. After having not played in so long, you'd imagine he's going to improve the line, but there's no guarantees.
There's not a guarantee, and it's going to be a different crew that he's going to be standing alongside as
Right.
opposed to what he was starting next to last year
Right.
for his brief time as a starter.
Yeah, that's a big deal. Having veterans around you, and it was a brief time, but having veterans around you, even if they're aging, certainly helpful. He was kind of pegged to potentially be the leader of this offensive line and teaching some rookies, even Kendrick Green at center. And then, of course, his injury just continued to linger and linger and linger. And it was week 4 and week 5 and week 6 and week 7 and now it appears again that he's not earning a helmet, let alone being hurt, but maybe he has re-aggravated something. Maybe he is needing another surgery. We don't know. It's been rumors. There's nothing that's definitive. So it does feel like that when Banner can go, and if he can go soon, he would help things and should be out there, maybe starting right tackle. Who knows? It's 4-4 still right now, kind of struggling a little bit on the field. So the Steelers certainly, but they can use all the help they can get, even if he's not better. I think they can use to try things on the offensive line. So it does make you wonder why Banner can't get out there if you're kind of willing to try things, because it is a facet of the team that needs to improve. On the Ebron front, do you think that would help this offense at all? Just he's still not been out there. It's back-to-back weeks. It's not exactly his position has been hurting, as Freiermuth caught 2 touchdown passes in this game, but he is another pass catcher. Even if it has to be 3 tight ends doing it, if they're not going to get enough from the receivers, you certainly would like another pass catcher.
I think his presence on the field will keep the coverage honest. And
Right.
I think he's a guy, even though he's had his issues, especially in the red zone since joining the Steelers, he's still a guy that can change a game. Now, Pat Freiermuth has done everything he can to be that tight end,
Right.
who historically has been the type who has wrecked the Steelers in the past. And it's, fun to actually be on the other side of that window and watch a Steelers tight end do these things. But I think Ebron's the type of guy that you have to respect him when he's on the field. And when he's not on the field, the offense suffers.
Yeah, and not crazy numbers for Freiermuth, but just such a red zone threat. And we saw him and Heath Miller talk before the game. Heath Miller in attendance for this one. Ben comparing him to Heath Miller in training camp, talked about having one-on-one sessions and showing him filming Heath Miller. That means Ben likes him. Ben feels he can count on him at the red zone. That's very important for a tight end. You maybe would like to have another one out there. Certainly they talked about 2 tight end sets. They're not going to do that as often, obviously, with Gentry as they would with Ebron. It would help move the chains, especially if you're not going to get more production from Claypool, who pretty soon is going to start getting criticized for the lack of production after the great year he had last year. Same thing even from Deontay Johnson, to be fair. He's the number 1 receiver on this team. He's emerged to be that, but you still even need more production from him at times. Big play here or there, but not really game-breaking number 1 receiver stuff at times as well. And then Chase Claypool again, 30 yards or so, just not good enough from him. But Freiermuth, 43 yards, 44 last week, 58 the week before. So again, it's not like he's throwing up 120 yards like Antonio Gates or Tony Gonzalez back in the day, but he's become that new Ebron in a way, the red zone threat for the Steelers, and it is working. But the Steelers do enough to get this victory. They do enough. That's really the word. They do enough. The phrase here for the Steelers in this game. They were good enough. They do enough. They win it 29-27. Shawn, I appreciate the time. I was about to say I'll let you get back to your night, but I basically will let you get back to your morning. So
yeah.
So enjoy a cup of coffee on me, or maybe go back to bed. I don't know. But again, I appreciate you staying up with me, and I appreciate the time, and we'll talk again soon, man.
All right. Sounds good. Thank you very much for having me on.
Absolutely. Again, that was Shawn Curtis, who is with the Tribune Democrat, as I think he kind of saw it the way anybody would. The Steelers team won the game. That's the most important thing. But a lot of warts still on the Steelers team, the offensive line in particular. If that does not improve, a lot can't improve. Needing more big plays, needing more from the receivers in particular with that depth. Ebron being back, as much as he's not needed for the future, he'd certainly be helpful now. Again, don't get what's going on with Zach Banner. Again, it's an unknown. I like the guy. I can't definitively say he'd make this team better. He'd all of a sudden be an all-pro like he was pegged a year or so ago, and people loved him with the jumbo tight ends, a very popular player, whether it be on or off the field and what he has to say. And again, that great training camp that he had now 2 years ago, people thought, oh man, it could be a Pro Bowl season. He's going to be great. He beat out Chuck Secor. We've learned that Chuck's isn't that great either. Maybe beating him out wasn't that tough. And also it's just purely an unknown. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter what you thought of him. You could think he wasn't going to be even good at that point. There's no way to argue he's going to do anything great if we haven't seen it. So we need to see it. We need to get him on the field. I don't see how it could hurt the offensive line. And if he goes out there and it's worse, okay, egg on everyone's face, but at least you tried. I'd rather have that be the scenario than have the O-line continue to struggle and a banner just dangling out there, unless he has re-aggravated, unless he does have another serious injury, and then maybe go have the surgery and shut it down. If he doesn't want to, too bad. And I get 2 years out of football will be really hard with that big body, but he got to shave some weight in the offseason if that's what he has to do. So a lot of questions still around the Steelers. A lot of things still need improved. The Bears really arguably should have won this game. That many penalties against them. The taunting call, which I'll say it, I don't like the call. I do think taunting in general sucks, but there was some shoulder shake. There was some looking. It's minor. It was lame. I'll admit that. But you got to be smarter if you're the Bears. You absolutely have to be smarter if you're Marsh. I mean, that's just a boneheaded play. They got themselves off the field, and then it just ended up not mattering nearly as much. So, yeah, that's what they talked about it to us after the game for the Bears, that they just had to get themselves off the field. That's what their coach talked about. So, and obviously the Steelers are going to take it when it's given. So the Bears play the one off. Justin Fields plays the one off. They are building something there. I do like him into the future. That was a big boy drive there at the end, a game leader. It didn't end up being a game winner because maybe team MVP Chris Boswell did it again for the Steelers, and the Steelers got the win now 5-3. So certainly feeling comfortable in comparison to some of their rivals, in comparison to the Bengals, even in comparison to the Ravens, even in comparison to the Browns, who won, but the Steelers have beat them. So the Steelers got to feel kind of comfortable right now, which is shocking from where they were a few weeks ago. And of course, the Lions coming up, you feel like that's a win, but then the schedule does beef up a little bit after that, so it remains an unknown. That'll do it for this edition of the show. Like Shawn, I got to do some work now, so I can't go right to bed, but I gotta start maybe my next day after a long sleep here as we now unpack and move on from Monday Night Football to another week on a Sunday. But the Steelers do pick up the victory, 29-27. The Steelers winning Monday Night Football over the Bears, another home Monday Night Football win as that streak continues. Monday Night Football home wins in 1991. That's just freaking fantastic and unbelievable, really. But the Steelers do win this. They didn't look great. Certainly didn't look great at the end. I don't know what their feelings are right now, but a win is a win, and the Steelers do get the win. Head over to SteelersNow.com for all of our post-game coverage, for our game recap, our video reaction, all of our stories, news, and notes from this game, and our analysis and our coverage throughout the week headed into